Moving into priority area 3 under laying the foundations for adaptations, and this is on helping firms and people manage residual risks and natural disasters. When we looked at the schematic about incentivizing infrastructure providers by the government to take some risk and provide a certain level of resilience, we talked about how government can deal with the unavoidable risks, and intolerable risks have to be covered by the infrastructure provider. So here residual risk is in a similar vein. While effective risk mitigation can go a long way in reducing losses and damages, some natural shocks are too extreme and intense to be prevented. Governments must develop strategies to ensure that when disasters do occur, people and firms can cope without devastating long-term consequences and can recover quickly. So it's this question of government's role in making sure that people and firms are equipped with managing residual risks and natural disasters without going under, because then the economy suffers and everybody will suffer. Under this we have action item 3.1, save lives and money with Hydromet early warning and emergency management systems. I have a whole course on S2S, sub-seasonal to seasonal forecasting applications to water, health, agriculture, energy, transportation, and so on. So that obviously is a big part of early adaptation. So avoiding the managing the unavoidable comes down to having good forecasts and early warnings at long enough leads to make decisions. We have discussed this elsewhere a lot. Weather forecasts enable the anticipation of and preparation for extreme events, and timely evacuation can save thousands of lives, which works very well for cyclones and heat waves in India now, for example. Preparation reduces physical damage and economic losses. For example, shuttering windows ahead of a hurricane can reduce damage by up to 50%. Just a simple closing of the window. The benefits of providing universal access to early warning systems globally have been repeatedly found to largely exceed costs by factors of at least 4 to 10. There is also a set of good practices to ensure that early warnings are communicated properly so that people can act upon them and that shelters meet communities' needs. This includes considering gender issues, access for people with disabilities, and how to organize shelters in times of epidemics and pandemics like COVID-19. So COVID-19 is a running theme through this book, and we'll visit it in many ways in each section. But actually the early warning systems in India, for example, it shows that who uses the early warning systems, the effectiveness of the use of the early warning system goes up as a woman is got better education. And it's not like college degree. From grade 4, 5, 6, 7 itself, you can have much higher ability to use early warnings to protect her family and her house, her assets, property, whatever. So how we convert early warning systems into actually them being used or being usable depends on closing this last mile gap, which is what is meant by saying communicated properly and capacity building, so that people know how to use them and what the uncertainties are, so that they get used to intrinsically taking care of those uncertainties. Action 3.2, provide all firms and households with risk management instruments. Helping households cope with and recover from shocks requires a holistic and flexible risk management strategy with a range of policy instruments appropriate for different disasters and affected populations. Poorer and richer households have different needs and can be supported with different instruments. So here is an example. Risk finance strategies for households and governments. The red ones are for governments or local authorities, and the black ones are instruments targeting households. And you can see that the scales here are from smaller events of hazards to more intense events, and the horizontal axis goes from poorer households at this end to richer households at that end. Revenue diversification, social protection, and remittances kind of remains, let's say, basically flat across the income groups. But when you talk about financial inclusions like savings and credit as tools or market insurance, the rich people probably are better covered in terms of dealing with more intense events, but governments have to set in and have reserve funds to cover this socioeconomic group. Government insurance and contingent finance has to protect people with increase, to a higher level of income, and then international aid may become necessary for many countries which have disasters of the scale of Pakistan floods, where the entire country was underwater, for example, or COVID comes and hammers a country completely flat, and so on and so forth. So this is considered the adaptive social protection, and these are critical. How they are implemented, how they are, whether international aid is always available, whether it's sufficient, and whether it's in time, and so on, of course, cannot be always foreseen, so one has to deal with those anyways. Action 3.3 under this: develop the insurance sector and building on public-private partnerships. Domestic disaster insurance markets can be effective channel for developing the resilience of disaster-exposed households and businesses. Governments can use their own resources to support domestic insurance markets and reach households and businesses with insurance products, realizing their policy goals of expanding the population's financial resilience to disasters. The Turkish catastrophe insurance pool and the Mongolian livestock insurance pool are good examples of public-private partnerships that have substantially increased insurance penetration at the local level. But then you have the massive earthquake that hit Turkey, which was beyond anything, so residual risk there was very high, and the government had to basically cover a lot of things, and it'll take them a long time to recover from those. And now they have an election to deal with in the meantime, and election is obviously being affected by the aftermath of the earthquake, etc. Action 3.4: build a social protection system and make it responsive to shocks. For the poorest households, savings are often not an option, and high transaction costs and affordability issues make access to private insurance challenging. These households need well-targeted and easily scalable social safety nets. So you can see here, poorer households do not have market insurance or financial inclusion in terms of savings and credit, so government has to step in there. Adaptive social protection systems have proven to be critical for channeling resources to those who are most in need due to climate stresses. Based on existing social protection systems, adaptive systems can respond quickly to disasters or slow onset climate crises by scaling up or providing additional resources to regular beneficiaries. For example, in Fiji, all beneficiaries of Poverty Benefit Scheme received exceptional transfer after Tropical Cyclone Winston in 2016. So there are these success stories which provide some incentives for other countries to adapt those types of solutions. Scaling out or providing support to additional beneficiaries during bad times or years. For example, the number of beneficiaries of Ethiopia's Productive Safety Net program depends on rainfall. So you can have these contingency kind of coverages which wax and wane based on the need. Let me read the Spotlight S1 here, which is about COVID-19 before going to Action 3.5. Exceeding the COVID-19 crisis, more resilient than before? This is a question. A few months into the COVID-19 crisis, almost all countries have boosted their social protection systems to help their populations manage the pandemic and the consequences of needed containment measures. If designed and implemented sustainably, and if efforts are maintained over the long term, any improvements made during the current crisis could improve all social protection systems capacity to scale up quickly and efficiently next time countries are affected by a major shock, including climate-related shocks. So COVID lessons, COVID implementation of measures can translate to climate-related shocks as well. This includes, for example, creating and maintaining household registries and electronic payment mechanisms. So this was written just as COVID was getting cranked up, and now we are officially out of COVID. COVID is declared to be ending or ended already, even though some infections are still going around. It's not a pandemic anymore. Okay, so those are important lessons coming out of COVID. We'll look at many others along the way. Action 3.5: help firms develop business continuity plans and financial preparedness. Individual firms' ability to cope with a shock and continue to produce in the aftermath of a disaster depends on many factors, but they can do a lot to become more resilient. Obviously, the usual recommendation is to identify threats, asset risks, and consider mitigation options. This allows firms to invest in prevention, for example, by adding a generator in case of power outage, investing in movable flood protection, or even elevating critical equipment. It also helps them to prepare for residual risk. Preparing business continuity plans, BCPs, can ensure a firm's management and workers know what to do in case of disaster to maintain or restore production as fast as possible. So it's not just how you deal with the impact of the shock, but how you recover, how quickly you recover from it. BCPs should consider firms' full supply chain and include issues that may affect suppliers and clients. Other things to consider include financial issues such as how to manage a drop in sales, increased supply prices, or the urgent need to replace expensive pieces of equipment. Access to contingent credit lines and appropriate insurance are among the many tools that firms can include in their business contingency plans. A good example of how supply chains get affected came as early as 2011 when Typhoon Haiyan hit Philippines, and Philippines is a big supplier of coconut oil, coconut products to basically all countries around the world. And somebody did a nice calculation on how the impact of Typhoon Haiyan on Philippines percolated through the supply of coconuts and how that affected various economic activities across the globe, and some of the losses in GDP because of this were significantly high, which one doesn't imagine. So now, because of the connected global economy, climate risk in one place can quickly become a climate risk for everybody else because of this cascading propagation through the system. Reading one more, action 3.6: be prepared to build back better after disaster with contingency plans and financing. So you should quickly learn your lesson if you're hit by 1 in a 100-year event in terms of flood or drought or heat wave or whatever. Building back whatever infrastructure is involved and whatever was damaged has to take that lesson into account, because now 1 in a 100-year event may become once in 20 years or once in 10 years and so on. When a disaster hits and old or low quality assets are destroyed, countries can build back better under improved building norms, thereby improving both productivity and resilience. But this does not always happen, often because the urgency to reconstruct leaves little time and few resources to rethink the design or spatial footprint of cities and infrastructure. Building back better depends on the ability to plan and implement the reconstruction process efficiently, or on the existence of plans prepared before the crisis occurs. So this is basically means this is necessary and important and urgent, and yet it's not that easy to implement in reality. So this is always the case when it comes to making large changes in established practices with vested monetary interests or players. Okay, so we'll come back and look at priority area 4 on managing financial and macro fiscal issues in the next podcast, and just in time because I need some water. It's very hot and very humid in Mumbai, and I'm still living without AC for most of the day, except when it's too hot to sleep, but such is life. Okay, so see you in the next podcast in a minute.